If he asked you to be his running mate, would you say yes?
Yes.
So what you just heard there was Rachel Maddow and Elizabeth Warren last night on MSNBC. And Maddow asked Warren if she would serve as Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. And in one word, she said yes. And when you combine that with her endorsement of Biden yesterday, it all comes off to me as the end of an extremely disappointing campaign by Elizabeth Warren. I know her campaign's been over for more than a month, but the reality is that when she started her campaign, there was a real hope that she could be somewhat of an ally to Bernie Sanders. She was never going to be Bernie. She was never going to be as strident and progressive as Bernie, but she would be a solid alternative, and that she would be part of a team that could help ensure that a progressive, somebody on the left, could end up as the Democratic nominee, either her or Bernie. Not everyone was convinced, but a lot of people were hopeful about what Warren's campaign could mean. But while she started strong with a commitment to a wealth tax and Medicare for all, as the year went on in 2019, she became more and more cautious. She began to flip-flop. She began to moderate her calls for things like Medicare for all. And by 2020, she had begun to lie about Bernie Sanders, saying that Bernie said a woman couldn't win. She began to say that Bernie Sanders supporters being mean online is the biggest issue in the campaign, even as right-wing Democrats were fundamentally attacking the basic policies that she and Bernie were running on, and that when the chips were ultimately down, she chose to sit on her hands and not endorse Bernie Sanders when it became clear it was going to be either Bernie or Biden as the nominee. And so every step of the way, the people that had hope in Elizabeth Warren to be a progressive friend to Bernie Sanders were utterly abandoned and disappointed. And her endorsement of Biden yesterday, I think, totally missed the mark. Like Barack Obama's endorsement, it was delivered well. Technically, it was well done. But the problem is, I don't believe it, and I don't think a lot of people will believe it either, because it was predicated on this idea that Joe Biden's this great guy who cares about working class Joes and Janes, and that's going to fight for progressive, bold, structural change. But he's not. Joe Biden has never really said that his campaign was about fundamentally transforming America. It was always about restoring normalcy, getting back the good old Barack Obama, Joe Biden days in the White House, getting back to that time before Donald Trump, getting back to that time when the Republicans were decent, hardworking folks that also supported regular people, but we just disagreed about the way forward. Joe Biden this whole time has been 100% predicated on selling a vision that if you vote for me, we can pretend Donald Trump never happened, and that all of the bad stuff he's done and the Republicans have done with him has never happened, and we can just get back to those better days. But we can never go back. And Warren, to her credit, even when she was wrong about Bernie, was often right about Joe Biden when she said that Joe Biden, as a man who wants no structural change, who has told elite donors that nothing will fundamentally change, and that is a career Washington insider, will not be the person to bring progressive Americans, to bring regular Americans what they need at this crucial time in history. And that was before the current crisis we're all dealing with, where the need for fundamental change is even clearer than it was 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, when Warren hadn't technically dropped out. And so Warren and Obama painting Joe Biden as this progressive is just off base, and I don't think anyone will be convinced. I get the realities of party politics. The nominee gets endorsed by everyone who ran. That's the way it goes. Like it or hate it, them's the rules. Joe Biden's the nominee, he gets the endorsement. But endorsing him as somebody that's like Bernie Sanders, a fundamental champion of the working class and of big change is needed, is just a lie. The reason people voted for Joe Biden is because they thought he was the anti-Trump pick, and they're scared and they want to return to the security blanket of the pre-Trump years. I don't think that's possible, but it's what a lot of Democratic primary voters, especially boomers and older, that's what they wanted. Out of their candidate They didn't want somebody like Bernie Sanders this time. They wanted Bernie's ideas, they wanted Bernie's policy, they wanted Bernie's vision, but when it came to the candidate, they wanted Joe Biden. So don't paint Joe Biden as something that he's not. It's not going to convince anybody. For the Bernie supporters and for the Warren supporters that are skeptical about Joe Biden and aren't willing to vote for him, at least yet, these sort of endorsements will do nothing to convince them. Again, Warren's campaign was so deeply, deeply disappointing. I get why she eventually endorsed Joe Biden. I do. I can disagree with it. I can think that Warren and Bernie Sanders should have demanded much more from Joe Biden before they made such an endorsement, but we knew it was coming sooner or later. But what really bothers me about Elizabeth Warren is that when the chips were down, she never endorsed Bernie. Who knows if it would have made a difference? Bernie might have still lost Super Tuesday. Bernie Sanders might have still lost the remaining states. Probably it's a bit closer, but not by a whole lot. The point is, however, Warren had a chance to take a stand for her values. Even if she was mad about the emojis, or even if she felt that Bernie Sanders was mean to her, or even if she felt that the Bernie campaign was toxic, or all of these sorts of peripheral excuses. The fact is, only Bernie was running on core Warren policies: wealth taxes, structural environmental change, Medicare for all, free university education, the cancellation of all student debt, or Warren's case, most student debt, but an ambitious debt cancellation program. Joe Biden was not offering any of those things. Bernie Sanders was. Warren demonstrated that she was not on the progressive team when the chips were down. Buttigieg and Klobuchar demonstrated that they were 100% on the Joe Biden neoliberal team. They dropped out within 24 hours, basically, of South Carolina. But Warren sat on her hands, spoiled the Super Tuesday vote, and then even after that, she never even endorsed Bernie Sanders. And progressives will never forget it. And I think it's crazy if you think that Elizabeth Warren is going to be Joe Biden's vice president. One, I don't think that vindicates Elizabeth Warren's decisions. I don't think that's a justification for selling out Bernie and the progressive movement. But even if you do think it would be, I feel that Elizabeth Warren is not going to be Biden's pick, because even Elizabeth Warren's limited progressive ideas are too left-wing for Joe Biden. And more than that, he's already hinted that he wants her to stay in the Senate, and that I think he's going to pick someone like Stacy Abrams or Kamala Harris or Gretchen Whitmer or Amy Klobuchar, either because they represent a minority community that's important to the party, or they come from the Midwest, which is where Donald Trump won the surprise election 4 years ago. Warren, from an ideological and tactical perspective, will not be the vice president. And so the Warren people, the Warren stands that felt that it was right for her to not endorse Bernie because Biden was going to win anyway, and this kept the VP door open, are going to be sorely, sorely disappointed. All in all, Warren really, really broke my heart a little bit in this campaign. I was never a full Warren supporter, never at all. People on my channel will know that going back all the way in 2019, I never backed Elizabeth Warren over Bernie. Never, ever, ever. But I was hopeful that she could be a darn good second option if Bernie, for whatever reason, wasn't clicking. And I know, and I'll close on this, and all of you guys know this too, that if the roles were reversed, Bernie would have 100% dropped out and endorsed Elizabeth Warren. That she didn't do the same tells us everything we need to know about her and her disappointing campaign.